In this segment of Gas Powered Thoughts, we're going to install the motor onto the chassis that we assembled in the last step for the Goblin conversion. You might recall we built a landing gear assembly earlier and we prepared the motor. We're going to combine those two and fit them into the upper chassis. When this is done, all we need to do is add some electronics and then put the tail boom on it, and we're going to be done. This is the engine installation step. We're going to combine a number of parts we've already assembled along with a couple of more parts from the conversion. This is the chassis that we just assembled. This is the landing gear that we pre-assembled, also the engine that we pre-assembled. And from the conversion kit, you need the bottom motor plate and the two mount blocks for that. Also, the conversion kit comes with all the bolts you need to get the motor mounted as well as the bottom plate. From the conversion kit, you're going to want to take the engine plate offsets, which are two pieces of Delrin. They have a slot cut in them, and they're going to be placed on the landing gear. If you don't have the KDEs, they'll simply sit over the landing gear plate and be bolted down. If you are using the KDEs, this slot fits right over the reinforcement bracket there, fits tightly. Next, we'll take the motor plate and we're going to align it with the landing gear. This is the rear of the landing gear, this is the front. I'm going to take this plate so that this cutout is facing what will be the left side of the landing gear and towards the rear. I'm going to set it on these blocks and then we'll put the bolts through them. Go ahead and install the 4 M2.6 bolts with washers. They'll go through the motor plate, through the mounting blocks, and into the landing gear. You just don't want to tighten these up right now. You want to leave this loose. That's so that later the motor can align with the clutch in the upper frame. In order to prepare the engine to mount into the lower frames, you want to remove the 4 M5 shroud bolts. Set those aside for now. Then the motor will simply sit in. You want to do the alignment based on the kill switch here. There's a special cutout just for that. Once it's in place, you can flip it over, reinstall these bolts. You can go ahead and apply thread lock and tighten these up because the engine will self-align into the bottom plate. Once the engine's been put in the bottom plate, you can reinstall the 4 shroud bolts with thread lock. You can go ahead and fully tighten these up. What you don't want to tighten up are the 4 bolts that hold the bottom plate to the landing gear. You want to leave this loose because that'll get tightened up after this is installed into the frame and all the final alignment's done. Before we put the two frame halves together, if you've chosen to put the fuel inlet on the tank in the location I specified earlier, you might want to go ahead and put the fuel tubing on now for the inlet because it's going to be really tight once the motor's in place and hard to get in. So this is a 6-inch piece of Tygon. If you've put the inlet somewhere else, you may need a different length. So we're just going to put the upper chassis or upper frame on top of the motor. Before you do that, the clutch has to be positioned as so, with the shoes forward and backwards. That makes the gap on each side large enough to go through the frame. The other thing you need to be careful of is the plate on the bottom. This is just tabbed in there, so you need to hang on to that. Take the fuel line, get it out of the way. And this whole assembly simply goes over the lower chassis and it will drop into place. Now once it's in place, you're going to use bolts in these two positions. These are 12 millimeters. You're going to use 8 millimeter bolts here, here, and here. 12 millimeter in the front, 8 millimeter in the back. Same thing on the other side. If you chose to install the fuel line at this time, you can go ahead and connect it to the carburetor. I never put a filter or any sort of T-fitting in the fuel inlet. You can do that in the overflow line, but I keep this line pristine. Before you tighten up the bolts that actually hold the engine in and the ones that hold the bottom plate in, the easiest way to self-align all of this is to take the spark plug out of the motor, take a spin starter, and simply spin the motor over a few times. Basically, that'll cause everything to self-align. Right off the bat, what you can do is now tighten up the 4 bolts on the bottom that hold the motor plate in place, and then go ahead and tighten up the 8 bolts that hold the motor in. Okay, you can see we've got all the bolts in now. Use these large washers on the upper engine mount bolts and regular finishing washers on the 3 lower ones, as well as all of the frame plate mounts. Both sides are the same. You can see that the bolts on the original main drive fit into slots here in the frame, and they're slotted so that the belt tension can change and you don't have to loosen those or change those in any way. So this takes care of finishing up the assembly. We can move on now to the next step.